This is the audio lecture for Chapter 8 from the NITEX Technology Matters. And the chapter title for Chapter 8 is Should the Market Select Technologies? NI has returned to more of a straight ahead question for the title of this chapter as opposed to the colon infused title he had in Chapter 7 and the sort of two choices that he had in some chapters before that. And one of the things that you'll notice in this chapter title, the question that is this chapter title, is that he's got the phrase "the market" in quotation marks, sort of setting that aside or calling attention to that phrase or that concept. And one of the things that he's doing here is to at least implicitly call into question the very idea of the market as we know it in terms of a marketplace that operates according to economic guidelines and so forth. The opening words, the opening sentence of the chapter is this question: how should society select technologies? And this probably would have served equally well as the title of this chapter because it is this question, just as much as the one that actually is the chapter title, that is the heart of Chapter 8. And so there's a number of related questions to this question: how should society select technologies? One of these is should we leave it up to the market forces? Should the selection of new technologies and the development of new technologies simply be left up to the marketplace without any kind of regulations, without any kind of input or indeed guidance from the citizenry of a society? Just leave it up to the market. Those that find success with consumers will be adopted. Those that do not will not be adopted, and leave it to that criterion solely to determine which technologies are selected. The adjoining question to this is: are countervailing government powers needed in the selection of technologies? Technologies have a great many impacts in a great many different areas of society. And the question is, because of that, and because of the impacts that technologies can have on people's lives, should the government be involved in terms of exercising its power or placing regulations on the selection and development of different kinds of technologies? And so then what is the proper balance between the market and the regulators that are trying to put some sort of controls on the development and introduction of new technologies? And then, finally, should citizens and consumers have a say in the development of new technologies and the selection of new technologies? Um, if there's going to be a balance that tilts a little bit more towards, or even just has an equal amount of government regulation and government powers involved in the selection of technologies, should part of that aspect of the selection of technologies be if having citizens and consumers give input into the selection of technologies, having just everyday people help provide information for the decision as to whether or not a society ought to use these particular types of technology. So all of these questions together are what we are going to be exploring in Chapter 8. And so this balance between the market and regulations, and then this question of whether citizens should have a say in the selection of technologies, and if so, what form should that input take? These are all of the things that we're going to be exploring this week and that you're going to be reading about in Chapter 8. So let me proceed here by giving a little bit of an overview of some of the historical examples of this balance between the market and government regulation that Nye discusses throughout the chapter in Chapter 8. The first one of these is the United States patent system. Everybody is probably at least vaguely familiar with what patents are and how they are put in place and are utilized to protect inventors and to protect uh, companies and the owners of different technologies from having their technologies infringed upon. Companies develop a new technology, inventing a new one or innovating a prior technology, and patents provide them with protections from infringement so that other people or other companies cannot just take those ideas or those designs and utilize them without providing some sort of compensation to the person who uh, invented or innovated that particular idea. Now, the patent system, or the idea of having patents, as Nye says, is something that was suggested in the U.S. Constitution. It is right there in the text of the Constitution that the United States would have some sort of a system protecting the ideas and the inventions of people who came up with these new sorts of technologies. However, the Constitution was ratified in approximately 1890. There was not actually a bureaucracy set up in the United States to deal with patents and process patents until about 1836, so about between 40 and 50 years after the Constitution was ratified. Was there actually a system set up explicitly to deal with patents? Throughout the 19th century or throughout the 1800s, invention and innovation was largely the province of individual researchers or individual inventors, individual people working on their own who would then when they came up with an idea for a new product or a new technology, they would take that to investors, take that to companies who would then, decide or not to develop further that technology. Once we get into the 20th century, however, corporations and companies realize that there is a great upside to them sort of taking control of that process and doing the development of new technology themselves within their companies. And so that is when we have the rise of corporate research labs or the rise of what's nowadays usually called R&D or research and development departments within corporations and companies. Throughout the 20th century, corporate research labs were a big force, one of the biggest forces in the development of new technologies. Just one example of those is the Bell Labs, which worked for the Bell Telephone Company in developing new types of telephone technologies. By the end of the 1960s or so, corporate research labs had taken such a control of the technology development process that Congress, in part for that reason, decided to create an agency called the Office of Technology Assessment. The Office of Technology Assessment, or OTA, as it was known. This was an agency that was part of the legislative branch and was one of several agencies that served as an advisory apparatus for Congress. When bills came before Congress that related to technology or related to or included a lot of technical information, the Office of Technology Assessment would take a look at this information, sort of provide their take or their assessment on how technologically feasible this information was, and so forth, and would give advice to the Congress as a whole and to individual members of Congress on issues related to technology. And this Office of Technology Assessment was created in 1972. It operated for just over 20 years, being closed in 1995 when Republicans took over control of Congress after the midterm elections of 1994. And because of ideological reasons to a great extent, we're trying to trim uh, government agencies as much as possible. This is sort of the beginning in the mid 1990s of that impulse, which is still with us today, all the way through current elections. And so the OTA was closed in 1995, and Congress lost that source of advice on technological issues that they had had for over 2 decades. And Nye sees that, I think, as being something that is unfortunate because now the legislators who are making many of the decisions about the selection of new technologies in our society do not have the kind of technical and technological advice that they had for a period of time there between the 1970s and the mid 90s. The last thing that Nye talks about that is related to historical examples of this balance between market forces and government regulation is uh, account of how, in relation specifically to the technology of nuclear power, the process, even though the OTA existed at this time, the process of deciding whether or not to engage in building nuclear power plants and the advice that was being given and considered by players in the political system regarding nuclear power, that whole process was sort of corrupted or diverted by the special interests involved in nuclear power. That rather than listening to the advice of things like the OTA in regards to the issue of nuclear power, uh, to a great extent, Congress and other politicians and so forth were listening to the special interests who were promoting nuclear power and trying to get nuclear power plants built, maybe without allowing full consideration of the technical issues that were involved with nuclear power. One of the biggest core concepts that Nye talks about in Chapter 8 is what is called the technological fix. The technological fix. And sort of a definition of what a technological fix is that it is the use of technology or a technological solution to solve a social problem or a problem that has its basis in societal attitudes. So, where there is a social problem that exists in society, rather than trying to find a solution that is a socially based solution, instead, there is a technological fix or a technological solution that is proposed and in many cases enacted to try and solve this social problem. An example will probably make this a little bit more understandable, and Nye talks about a number of examples in the text, but let me give you just one example here. Um, at one point in the 1950s, 1960s, auto pollution, pollution created by automobiles, had become a real problematic issue in American society. And so one of the there's a couple of different ways in which that problem could be solved. One of these was to develop technology to make it so that automobiles uh, had not as many emissions and cleaner emissions in terms of the exhaust and so forth that came out of the automobiles. That was the technological fix for that particular problem. Another potential solution to that problem would have been to change the behavior of people driving cars, encouraging people or even putting in place restrictions uh, to sort of really force people to a certain extent to drive less so that there would be less pollution created by automobiles. Trying to get people to avoid driving in favor of other things like possibly riding bicycles or walking or using mass transit so that the overall level of auto pollution would decrease, not necessarily through technological means, but through the changes in behavior and attitudes that would represent a social solution to that particular problem. There are a couple of issues that can um, make technological fixes less um, less attractive. One of them is that sometimes it really is a social solution that is needed to solve a social problem. A social problem requires a social solution rather than a technological one. And as an example of that, Nye talks about in quotes, has a quotation related to drunk driving. In this same period of the roughly the 1950s and 1960s, drunk driving had become an issue as well in those years. And there was a couple of solutions for that as well. One of which that was enacted was to make the cars safer, to add more safety features to automobiles. So that when and if drunk drivers ended up getting into auto accidents or causing auto accidents, that there would be less of a chance that there would be injuries either on the part of the driver or other people. So that was a technological fix that was attempted to try and minimize the impact of drunk driving. What one A social solution that really was more advisable and was in fact put into place and has been much more successful in decreasing drunk driving was trying to get people to change their behavior and change their attitudes in relation to drunk driving. Just convincing people that drunk driving is a negative thing to do, that they should not be engaging in as a form of behavior. And over the past 25 years or so, there's been a raised awareness in that respect in terms of changing people's attitudes, changing people's behavior in regards to drunk driving that has really been much more successful and is a better solution to the problem of drunk driving. So, oftentimes, social solutions are more advisable than technological ones in trying to fix or solve a problem. The other issue is that sometimes the technological fixes themselves need fixing. Sometimes a technological fix is put into place, but then something happens with that technology that requires fixing itself. As we have learned, there are often unintended consequences to various forms of technology, and sometimes the technological fix that has been put into place to solve a particular social problem ends up having unintended consequences and either does not fix the problem it was intended to solve or may help to fix it, but then also causes these additional problems. So that brings us to the issue of what role should citizens and consumers have in the selection of new technologies. And part of this set of issues is if citizens are going to have a role in making the decisions related to selecting technologies, what types of technologies should citizens weigh in on? It's probably the case that, as Nye talks about, that not every form of technology requires uh, citizen input or serious societal deliberation as to whether or not it should be adopted or introduced or not. So, in that case, what are the types of technology that sort of meet the threshold of needing to have or that really should have uh, citizen input and more deliberation on the part of society before they're selected and introduced to society. And once it's been decided that citizens should have a role in terms of providing input on a particular type of technology or on technology in general, what form should that input take? What how is that input going to be gathered? How what form is it going to take as far as being considered by the people making the decisions related to the technology and so forth. Now, Nye is pretty clear on where he stands on the question of whether or not citizens ought to have a role in providing input into the selection of new technologies. And he says, quoting directly from the text, he says, citizens need meaningful representation when technological decisions are made. Implying there that this input and this representation uh, on behalf of citizens should not just be token representation or token input, but it should be meaningful in terms of really gauging the attitudes and gauging the opinions of the citizenry in terms of deciding whether or not a technology should be introduced into society or not. And as far as the forms that citizen input into technology can take, one of the most intriguing that Nye talks about is what is called deliberative polling. Deliberative polling. This is a form of citizen input that has been used in different societies around the world, or in at least a few societies around the world. In both the Netherlands and in Denmark, a couple of European countries, deliberative polling has been used as a means of providing citizens with the opportunity to have input into the selection of new technologies, into those particular societies. And what deliberative polling is just polling the citizenry with focused questions as to what they think of a particular technology and whether or not they want for that technology to be available in their society. And now I give some more detail about exactly how and in what fashions that has been used in recent years. If it's decided that citizens should have input into the selection of technologies, there are some hindrances that exist, at least in America, for allowing that or having that citizen input take place. One of these is that the structures of society and the institutions that we have in American society right now uh, really sort of prevent that kind of input from taking place, or we lack the kinds of institutions that would facilitate or allow that input to take place. So one of the things that would have to happen is that we would have to have some sort of structure, bureaucracy for collecting that input and processing that input, and then making sure that that input was reflected in the decisions that were made as far as the selections of new technology. Another hindrance right now is, as Nye explores it, is that the mass media right now is really not interested in exploring or engaging with the development of public policy related to technology. The media is interested in more sort of superficial things related to technology, such as what are the new tech products that are coming out, and so forth, and not as interested in providing citizens with information about new technologies. And so that provides a little bit of a hindrance to citizens providing input in terms of decisions related to technology. And then finally, there is, in regards to the mainstream media, as Nye discusses it, what's called repressive tolerance. Repressive tolerance is an idea uh, that which seems a little oxymoronic or paradoxical at first. Tolerance is um, allowing things to exist, tolerating different things, whereas repressive or repression means not allowing those things to exist, or not being happy with the existence of those things, or trying to stop the existence of those things. And so the idea of repressive tolerance is one in which ideas are allowed to exist, they're tolerated, but because maybe they are somewhat marginal, they end up being sort of ignored by society. So allowing them to be expressed, but then also allowing them to sort of be marginalized. So, all of these ideas that I have been discussing in this lecture relate to this balance between market forces and government regulation or government role in the selection of new technologies in our society.